The next item of business is a debate on motion 22396 in the name of Fiona Hislop on an implementation plan for economic recovery. May I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Fiona Hislop to speak to and move the motion for up to 13 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I want to begin today on a note of hope and optimism. This morning, as I left home, I saw 3 young children from my street excited as they were setting out, all 3 starting Primary 1 this morning, which serves as a reminder of what our focus should be here, building a future and recovery for our young people. The Advisory Group on Economic Recovery report stated that Scotland's recovery must be education-led, and I'm clear that education, skills and employment opportunities that support our young people must be our focus. The actions we take now will shape the future opportunities of all Scotland's children. On top of the devastating health impacts, the COVID crisis has already caused serious damage to the economy here in Scotland and across the globe. The publication of labour market statistics yesterday and UK GDP figures today demonstrate clearly the challenge that individuals, communities and businesses will face for some time. Reflecting the urgency of the crisis, we quickly commissioned reports from a subgroup of the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board and the Independent Advisory Group on Economic Recovery to draw together recommendations for a green economic recovery built on well-being, jobs and a digital economy. The Advisory Group reported swiftly with 25 wide-ranging recommendations, and we set out immediately to develop a full response, which we published last week. We've accepted all recommendations and set out not just how we would take them forward, but where we can do more, with additional actions on procurement, SME support, digital support and equalities to help Scotland on its path to recovery. We responded immediately with actions to protect and support good, high-quality skilled jobs, and our work will continue. Further actions for recovery will be published in the forthcoming programme for government, the Infrastructure Investment Plan and the Climate Change Plan update. Clearly, government will have a key role in responding to this crisis, but I know we cannot do this alone. We need a national endeavour, working with partners from across the economy and society to deliver on the recommendations for recovery. We need everyone to play their part, and I reiterate my offer to work constructively with MSPs as part of that national recovery work. The reports were clear that we have an opportunity to do things differently, to rebuild our economy with well-being and fair work at its heart. That is something I passionately believe in. At the core of the Scottish Government's response to both reports is a firm commitment to do all we can, firstly, to protect jobs and the productive capacity of Scotland's economy. Secondly, to ensure that workplaces can reopen safely for workers and for customers, and that where there is a need to reskill or upskill to do their job differently, to take advantage of new opportunities, that they are able to do so. And thirdly, to create new jobs, good quality jobs for the future, as part of a necessary and desirable move towards a sustainable wellbeing digital economy built around fair work and a just transition to net zero. And the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery rightly highlighted the long-term impacts on young people as one of the greatest risks of the COVID crisis. The young people who will make up our future workforce are among those who have been hit hardest by this pandemic. We must support our young people, and I want to send a clear message to them today. Last month, we announced an additional £100 million employment and skills support fund to tackle the employment challenges we face as a result of the pandemic. And yesterday, I announced £10 million of this funding for a range of measures to recruit and retain apprentices, including for the Scottish Government's Adopt an Apprentice programme, supporting apprentices who may face redundancy as a result of COVID-19. The Advisory Group also recommended the creation of a jobs guarantee for Scotland's young people. I can announce today that the Scottish Government will be committing £60 million of the £100 million Employability Fund to support Scotland's Youth Guarantee, targeted at those in need of support. This will support young people in a range of ways to help make the transition into work, something I know has support of parties across the Chamber. I asked Sandy Begbie, who helped design the Edinburgh Guarantee, to urgently draw together an implementation plan of interventions to keep young people in work, to encourage employers to recruit more young people, and to ensure our colleges' education system prepares young people for future work opportunities. We want employers to have a clear leadership role in delivering the Youth Guarantee. I encourage employers in all sectors to come forward and support this crucial intervention to prevent COVID leaving a lasting impact on the employment opportunities of our young people, so they can play their full part in the economic recovery. And our actions must support the creation of jobs now, but we also have to put in place the long-term foundations for a future of good, sustainable jobs that contribute to well-being and grasp the opportunities of a green recovery. The £230 million economic recovery stimulus package announced in June was the start of this. The stimulus package will create new jobs by providing a pipeline of work for businesses covering construction, low-carbon initiatives, digitalisation and business support. Our net zero ambitions are at the heart of this stimulus, with £66 million to support the transition to renewable energy sources, research in future transport, including hydrogen bus investment and a range of renewables and decarbonisation projects across the country. Additionally, the Scottish Government's heat transition deal will support investment in low-carbon heat infrastructure projects, including in heat networks, heat pumps and hydrogen for heat to aid the net zero transition, reduce emissions from homes and buildings and create new green jobs across the sector. And we're supporting innovative new companies. The Scottish Enterprise have reported 199 applications, mainly from companies in the technology, engineering and life sciences sectors, to the £38 million Early Stage Growth Challenge Fund we launched in July. Our package for support for business has so far totalled over £2.3 billion. The Small Business and Retail Hospitality and Leisure Grant schemes have provided a lifeline for many companies. The support of the £185 million additional support fund and the £17 million for seafood and fisheries sector has provided targeted assistance where other schemes didn't. Collectively, these grants have helped to protect jobs, to prevent business closures and to lay the foundations of our economy to safely restart and recover. Protecting jobs, of course, goes beyond financial support. We will build on the successful partnerships that delivered sector-specific guidance at the height of the crisis by bringing together business, industry leadership and trade unions to deliver appropriate sectoral plans for recovery. These plans will chart the route out of the COVID crisis, outlining immediate, short, medium and long-term priorities with a focus on delivering a well-being economy, and will develop approaches to deal with other external issues facing the economy, such as the end of the EU transition period. And, Presiding Officer, this chamber must and will return to discuss the economic reality of Brexit on businesses and jobs. Beyond the measures we can take directly, we will also continue to press the UK Government to recognise the specific nature of Scotland's economy and to put in place appropriate measures to support the hardest hit sectors beyond the end of October, when the job retention scheme is phased out. There needs to be a sector-specific jobs protection and retention scheme for workers in the sectors that cannot safely reopen by this date. The nature of work has changed for many, and last week I announced we will double the size of the Flexible Workforce Development Fund to £20 million to help employers, particularly SMEs, upskill their existing workforce with training delivered by colleges. We will also support jobs through development of a COVID-19 Transition Training Fund, a flexible skills programme to support people facing redundancy in the most affected areas and sectors and regions to retrain, for example, in the green and digital jobs, which will be part of the economic recovery. And procurement and planning also have a significant role in supporting jobs. Last year, Scottish public sector procurement spending supported around 100,000 jobs. We will aim to get more value from our procurement spend, targeting economic recovery in local areas and securing jobs. We will explore options to alleviate planning constraints, build capacity and deal more quickly with complex applications to unlock investment and provide jobs. On the proposed amendments to the motion, Maurice Golden asked us to continue to work productively with the UK Government, which we will of course do, but we will also press them on the need for support measures that reflect the specific nature of Scotland's economy. Business and workers want action to protect and deliver jobs. That is what our response seeks to deliver, and we will keep Parliament informed of that progress. And I'm happy to see that the amendments from Richard Leonard and Willie Rennie recognise the importance of quality childcare. Presiding Officer, I've been campaigning for 15 years for childcare to be recognised as a crucial part of the economy, and I'm glad others agree, and I will listen to what they have to say. There's much in Andy Whiteman's amendment I can agree with, but I do not think it helps the tone of the debate or the desire to reach consensus if contributors on any side of that debate resort to name-calling. Recent events have really hit home that the COVID crisis has not gone away. We know that our economic recovery has to proceed in a safe and sustainable way that balances the safety of Scotland's people with their economic prospects and livelihoods. Indeed.
Dean Lockhart.
Thank you very much. As you will know, the Scottish Government has allocated £500 million to the Scottish National Investment Bank. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the vast majority of this money will be used to help existing firms survive COVID?
Fiona Hislop.
We have a well-respected and very talented Chief Executive, Elspeth McTaggart. If you don't have the opportunity to meet with her, I would encourage that she meets with you and to explain the progress of their work. They will be using their patient capital to support businesses. Much of it will be existing businesses, as he reflects, to make sure they can capitalise on the opportunities for a green recovery, but also save jobs. But they will also look to new industries. So, for example, in the North East, where we've got that transition from oil and gas companies, potentially around supply chains, but potentially new companies as well, there is that balance. But he's absolutely right that the growth and pipeline for jobs in Scotland, yes, will come from inward investment, yes, will come from new companies starting out, but there's great potential in our existing companies, particularly moving into that new energy transition and green recovery area. Presiding Officer, the only way to build a sustainable recovery will be by working collaboratively across parties and with industry, unions and other partners, building trust and confidence and taking decisions collectively. We're bringing forward the immediate actions we need to take to support Scotland's economy and protect jobs. And in the coming weeks and months, we will publish more detail in our programme for government, our infrastructure investment plan and our climate change plan update to match the scale and the ambition of what a well-being economy and a green recovery mean for Scotland. The COVID crisis has fundamentally changed how we think about many aspects of our economy and our respective roles within it. There is no question that we must now do things differently, and crucially, we now have an opportunity to work collectively in a national mission to rebuild our economy with well-being and fair work at its heart. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name.
I now call on Maurice Golden to speak to and move Amendment 22396-1 for up to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Conservatives welcomed the findings of the advisory group on economic recovery. The caveat was that there must be detailed policies drawn up as quickly as possible to get the recovery underway. The government's response also contains much to welcome. Talk of a green recovery, addressing rising unemployment and focusing on the well-being of our citizens. But the detail on how to accomplish any of that is still missing. And I say that because we need urgent action to prevent this crisis from becoming a catastrophe. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy understands that there is a need to act. During last month's debate, she said that the crisis had accelerated thinking, instilled a desire for change. That is why it is so frustrating not to see the urgency reflected in the government's response. And it should be, because jobs are being lost right now. Unemployment has risen to 4.5%, higher than the overall UK rate, and almost certain to rise again. Across the west of Scotland, we have already seen jobs go at Glasgow Airport, Rolls-Royce and many others. Similar losses are happening across Scotland, and serious effort is now needed to mitigate those losses. John Mason.
John Mason.
Thank the member for giving way. I mean, would you accept that some of that, like extending the furlough scheme, would be in the part of the UK government, and that the aviation and other sectors do need the furlough scheme extended?
Maurice Golden.
I fully accept that we need sector-specific action, and that both the UK Government and the Scottish Government have a role to play in the well-being of Scotland's economy. And I'm delighted that, for example, the UK Government has provided COVID corporate finance facility in excess of £2 billion to help airlines and aerospace companies as part of a suite of measures. Nevertheless, we must secure more than 500 Scottish jobs linked into the UK internal market. However, the SNP's plan only mentions strengthening Scotland's brand value in international markets and not the rest of the UK, where Scotland does 60% of its trade. With so many jobs... Yes,
Fiona Hislop.
I know there's a political and constitutional argument the UK wants to have about the internal market, but in my discussions with Minister Zahawi and also the Secretary of State, Alex Sharma, I've said to them that the danger of the proposals is that they will, it would slow up decision-making, it would provide opportunity for bureaucratic red tape for other people to decide decisions that are already made here in Scotland. So from a business point of view, does he see the merit of keeping things simple and using the mechanisms we already have, rather than having bureaucratic legislation when we don't need it? If you don't need to legislate, you shouldn't. That is a tenet of business philosophy.
Maurice Golden.
And I quite agree that we want to have minimum red tape, minimum bureaucracy, and indeed work collaboratively. Unfortunately, the Cabinet Secretary's colleague negotiating as part of the UK internal market doesn't share that same approach. And that is where the politics is unfortunately coming from, to the detriment of the people of Scotland. Of course, job losses will affect young people most of all, so I welcome the £50 million announced to tackle youth unemployment, but we need the breakdown, such as how much will go to colleges and universities to prioritise apprenticeships, or if any will be targeted at young people in rural areas who face their own set of challenges. We also need clarity on the proposed Transition Training Fund to help those at risk of redundancy. Exactly which sectors will it focus on, and will workers not in those sectors be ineligible for help? It is worth highlighting that the fund will support net zero efforts. That is the right approach if we want a green recovery. Efforts should be made to seek out opportunities with relevant businesses and sectors. For example, low-carbon bus manufacturer Alexander Dennis or the wider oil and gas sector both present opportunities to help hard-hit areas create green jobs and apprenticeships and retain high-value skill sets. The green recovery would also help increase resilience to future economic shocks by protecting natural capital, which underpins industries like agriculture, food and drink, tourism and hospitality. The latter has seen almost 90% downturn, a clear indication of the need for better protection. This is recognised in the government response, but again, we need to see the practical short and long-term policy steps, a common thread across every section of the plan. Take active travel. We have seen temporary adaptations with councils competing for funding. What we really need is fair funding for permanent adaptations that cut emissions, improve well-being and ensure better access for residents and visitors to local businesses and services. And local economies could further be helped through procurement reform. A commitment to make it easier for small businesses to win contracts is a good step, but the government could go further with a target for procuring from micro businesses. That would help unlock an additional 63p of value for every £1 spent with local suppliers. Further opportunities exist through improving our digital landscape. Here, there was a welcome commitment to work with telecoms operators to identify barriers to equipment deployment. And welcome is the commitment to boost Scotland's data hosting sector, which lags behind Wales. But the government must now set out the industry engagements, timescales and policies needed to make it happen. More importantly, we need to ensure the public have both access and the required skills to use digital services. The government response said too little on this, and we need to see plans for a sustained campaign covering a wider demographic base. Otherwise, we risk a digital divide between those who can and cannot access new, faster and cheaper services. The same risk is present in the proposals to boost business engagement by involving business leaders in policy development and increasing representation on public boards. We need to hear more about this. Which leaders, which sectors, and how will small businesses participate? Private enterprise accounts for almost 80% of jobs, so it is vital we have as broad a range involved as possible, or we risk another divide between those with the ear of government and those without. We also need transparency on potential government intervention. Building management expertise is sensible, but who decides how and when the Scottish Government takes ownership stakes in private businesses? Or the Scottish National Investment Bank? We are told it will open this year, but when and will it actually be ready to invest? For any of these measures to succeed, the public must have trust in them. We have seen that with the British government's furlough scheme, straightforward, trusted and widely successful as a result, almost 900,000 Scottish workers, a third of our entire workforce, are now protected by that UK government. The focus must be on saving as many jobs as possible. That is the challenge for the Scottish Government faces and that we face, because at the heart of this crisis are real people whose livelihoods are at risk. I move the amendment in my name.
I now call Richard Leonard, please, to speak to and move Amendment 22396.2 for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to set out the Scottish Labour Party's response to the Scottish Government's response to its advisory group on economic recovery. Now, it's true that signs of life have returned to our high streets, but Aberdeen is in lockdown once again, and here in Edinburgh, the city is a shadow of its usual August self. So let us make no mistake, Scotland is already in economic crisis. So this is an important debate, because working people across Scotland are struggling with rising debts and with rising anxiety as well, not knowing if they will ever have a job to go back to. So on top of that, it follows a decade when the take-home pay and the quality of life of those working women and men, those people who depend on the weekly wage, has seen their living standards slide. And now for those working people, the collapse in the jobs market, which we are now experiencing, is nothing short of catastrophic. And so let me suggest at the very outset to the Cabinet Secretary, on the day when the UK economy is officially defined as being in recession, that what is required to avoid a prolonged slump is a radical approach, including a radical use of the powers of this Parliament. And that means we need public investment in infrastructure and education. And let me say as well that in the week when we have seen the doubling of the unemployment claimant count, and when we know that the UK job retention scheme is being wound down and phased out completely in a matter of weeks, people are rightfully fearful of their future. And so it is our job to provide hope in place of that fear. Yes, I'll give way.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. I agree with some of what he says. Would he agree that what Germany has done by way of a fiscal stimulus we could do with in the UK as well, some 80 billion, but that would be well out with the range of the Scottish Parliament?
Richard Leonard.
Yeah, I think most economists agree that the only way to forge a pathway through this is to, at a time of low international interest rates, raise debt to invest. And I think that's been the call that the Labour Party has made, not only in Scotland but across the UK. So we are clear that we need a stimulus package. And we need to understand that we also need a strategy for industry, a plan for the economy, a plan for jobs, and a Green New Deal with investment prioritised in energy, in public transport, and in forms of construction. And we need as well targeted interventions to support and revive our manufacturing economy and our arts sector too, because the arts not only produce a high economic return, They are the lifeblood of a civilised society as well. So people are looking to us, looking to this Parliament, and they are looking now with a renewed sense of urgency, which is why our amendment makes the plea for that greater sense of urgency in the government's approach. So we support an urgent review of the fiscal framework. This Parliament needs a better deal to provide the investment that is required. We need to stand up against deindustrialisation, the offshoring of jobs, and we need to use all the levers at our disposal to ensure that renewable energy projects and low-carbon technologies deliver the maximum number of jobs for Scotland. We welcome the jobs guarantee for young people. Scotland urgently needs jobs for good, not the low-paid, part-time, short-term employment offered by the UK government's Kickstart scheme. So if we are serious about building an economy fit to weather the storm ahead, we cannot replicate that kind of scheme in Scotland. And this Scottish Jobs Guarantee Scheme must offer opportunities not just to young people, but to women of all ages who have lost their jobs during this crisis, along with investment in flexible childcare. As our amendment also points out, our priority must be supporting families across Scotland that are facing financial hardship, who need direct and immediate support now. So we back the calls from across Civic Scotland for the Scottish Government to bring forward a Scottish Child Payment Equivalent as soon as possible. And let us reflect as well that when the Scottish Human Rights Commission calls for an independent inquiry into whether the right to life has been breached in our care homes, we must say never again. Never again should our care system be left so unprepared, and never again should our care workers be so undervalued, which is why we believe that care, including childcare, must be a critical part of our future economy, our future social economy, and so we must invest in it now as part of this economic recovery plan. I'm in my final minute, I'm afraid.
I can allow a little extra time if you have.
Will you acknowledge that there is £11 million released particularly to nurseries to help ensure that we can have the flexible childcare we need now, although what he's reflecting on is a future perspective? Richard Leonard.
Yeah, thank you for that. But I think many of us are disappointed that the government took the decision to suspend the implementation of the 1140-hour scheme, for example. We think that should have been a matter of priority socially and economically and in terms of achieving greater equality outcomes. So let me conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, by saying this, that the path that we advocate will take courage to follow. It will take a belief in the importance of democracy in the economy. And that means involving business and trade unions in more economic planning, not just in the construction sector, but in every part of the economy. And let me issue a final word of warning. Of course, we support moves to attract inward investment. But if ever there was a time to use the reach of the new Scottish National Investment Bank, of Scottish Enterprise, of Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and of the new South of Scotland Agency to support Indigenous business, to support employee-owned and cooperative-owned businesses, it is now. We cannot just talk about a better Scotland. It's our duty to build it. I move the amendment in my name.
Now call Andy Whiteman to speak to and move amendment 22396.5 for around 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. And we've had a number of debates on the economy in recent months, but perhaps this is one of the most important. The economic crisis brought on by the COVID pandemic is unlike any in our lifetimes, and it's both got immediate and longer-term consequences, not all of which are fully in focus yet. And as many commentators have noted, it's not only an opportunity to rethink how our economy works, but a vital necessity that we do so. And that's why this debate is important, because we now have the report from the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, which the Scottish Government commissioned, and we have the Scottish Government's response to it. Now, the motion in the name of Fiona Hislop is unobjectionable in itself, and we'll be supporting it. But the fundamental flaw in the approach taken to economic recovery is exemplified by the reference in the motion to delivering a well-being economy. And this is also reflected in the title of the Advisory Group's report. But in neither that report nor in the Government's response is there any clear articulation of what a well-being economy looks like. And that, Presiding Officer, is why we need this debate, not just today, but in the months ahead. Because in our view, the advisory group's report is not a plan for a transformational change in our economy. It contains nothing, indeed, that would be out of the ordinary in normal economic times. And indeed, the government's own implementation plan opens by saying that the report, and I quote, validates our overall strategic approach. In other words, we're already doing what the report suggests we ought to. Now, this is not consistent with what Fiona Hislop indicated to Parliament on the 2nd of June, when she said we need, and I quote, a revolution in economic thinking that stimulates and values cooperative sharing of risk and reward. I thought that was a very well put phrase, but we're very, very far away from achieving that, because such a transformation, such a revolution in economic thinking would include tackling growing wealth inequalities, rentier capitalism, the excess returns to capital over labour, ownership and governance of the economy, and housing insecurities. And none of this is mentioned in the advisory group report or the response. And indeed, much of the implementation plan merely restates existing funding, announcing reviews, promising to speed up existing work and tinkering at the edges. In other words, there's little that is genuinely new that matches the scale of the crisis. And this contrasts markedly, I think, with other reports that have come out on green recoveries. For example, last month from the Climate Emergency Response Group, whose plans are both more practical and more radical. For example, zero-emission cities by 2030 via vehicle regulation, retrofitting buildings, rural jobs creation, etc. So the debate we need to have is, what does a well-being economy look like and how do we get there? Now, fortunately, we do have some expert advice to hand through the Wellbeing Alliance, an alliance of over 100 groups across the world. Now, a well-being economy is designed for a different purpose than the current economic paradigm. It's designed explicitly to serve people, communities and the planet. And its non-negotiable principles are dignity for all, a restored natural world, institutions that serve the common good, fairness, equality and radical democracy. Now, obvious lessons for this in relationship to the current crisis would include, for example, an overriding commitment to security in your own home, rather than the continuing precarious and insecure lives faced by so many families in the private rented sector. Now, there's nothing on such questions in the Higgins report or the government response, or indeed how to reduce the cost of living through things like rent controls for the COVID generation of young people already struggling with high debt, high rents, energy and transport costs. And underlying our concerns are long-standing questions about the role of economic growth and how it's measured. Now, in an ill-advised interview with the Times newspaper last week, Benny Higgins makes some outlandish claims, including describing Friends of the Earth Scotland and certain parts of the Green movement as, I quote, ideological zealots who would like to throw economic growth and jobs under a bus. To characterise the movement in this way, when it is at the forefront globally of charting a new economic paradigm, is not only lazy, but profoundly ignorant. And I'm sure Fiona Hislop will agree with me, given her injunction in her opening speech to avoid name-calling, which incidentally our amendment does not do. He then goes on to claim in the same interview that a well-being economy needs growth to pay for itself. Again, this is utter nonsense. Growth as currently being pursued and measured is not necessary. There is sufficient capacity, wealth and assets in the world for everyone to enjoy a basic and secure livelihood, but they do not do so because the ownership, control and distribution of this wealth is unequal. He then goes on to say that companies like BP are well capable of responding to environmental change and delivering well-being, even though such companies have been the main drivers and deniers of climate change, which has eroded the well-being of millions of people across this planet. Presiding Officer, it's our view that it's time for the government to part company with Mr Higgins. He has undertaken some useful work around the Scottish National Investment Bank, but recent comments of his are not befitting a government adviser. And not only the comments I've just rehearsed, but also, for example, his unhelpful and frankly sexist remarks in a Hollywood magazine interview comparing the First Minister's style unfavourably with her predecessor. To conclude, there have been many strong critiques of the advisory group report from the STUC, Engender, Friends of the Earth Scotland and the Just and Green Recovery Scotland campaign. This debate is far from over. Greens are fundamentally opposed to the assumptions underpinning the economic prospectus in front of us today. Our amendment explicitly rejects the advice of ideological zealots who put GDP growth ahead of addressing inequality in the climate emergency and makes a specific call to scale up home energy efficiency programmes. I move the amendment in my name.
Now call Willie Rennie, please, to speak to and move Amendment 22396.3 for around 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I move the amendment in my name. The devastating images across Fife and the east coast of Scotland overnight, I'm sure, will be in the mind of the Economy Secretary, and I know some businesses who were already teetering on the edge of survival. This might be something that pushes them over the edge, so I hope the Economy Secretary will be receptive to any appeals there are from companies who are dealing with the devastating impact of the floods. I know from my constituency there are certainly many communities who have been directly affected by the colossal amount of water that came down from our skies overnight. The visual representation also today of the recession, the plunging GDP, is quite astonishing. We've got a new scale for the map these days because the depth of the recession is so deep. And that should be a warning to us all that this is quite far-reaching and devastating impacts. 1 in 10 could be unemployed by the end of the year, and that could last for something in the order of 3 years. The impact on young people will be even more substantial, causing that scarring that everyone is talking about. The supply chains that are stuttering and broken in many cases, we need to spend quite a lot of time getting those back up and running again. And at the same time, we need to try and shape something new, because there will be some businesses that do not survive this. There will be some sectors that will diminish, and there will be new sectors that come along. And the strategy must be to make sure we have that transition from one type of economy to the next, while making sure we protect individuals from the worst of a recession. We cannot go back to trying to pay off this massive economic investment, financial investment that we have made in recent months in a short period of time. That would just crush any economic recovery. So we need to make sure we invest, and we invest wisely to make sure we get a wise and sustainable, fair and just economic recovery. We need to invest in the skills and the talents of our people through education, but also through good health, mental health and health itself, because our people are the best talents that we have. We need to make sure it is done fairly and justly, so that people get a good wage for a good job that they do, so they can have a decent house for their family and their future. But we also need to make sure it's environmentally sustainable, that we aren't pillaging the environment for the sake just of a few cheap jobs. It needs to be sustainable, it needs to be fair, and it needs to invest in the skills and the talents of our people. And that's what Liberal Democrats are seeking. But the problems that we had with the economy were deep-rooted before the pandemic came along. Scotland's notoriously poor and low productivity levels is something that we were improving, but only marginally, and it needs to see significant change as we move out of this recession. But what I think is madness is to go ahead with Brexit at this time. It is compounding the problems that we have with the pandemic and the deep-rooted problems that we already exist in our economy. Breaking ties with our closest economic partners at this time, I think, is madness. I think we need to be combining together, combining forces, so we have that negotiating power, so we have those good standards across Europe, so that we can trade freely from Auchtermuchty all the way through to wherever it is in Europe we want to trade. Those are the priorities I think we should have. And equally so, I think it would be unwise to proceed with an independence agenda as well, for exactly the same reasons. So I hope the SNP do reflect on that. The last thing we need is even more turmoil. But I want to praise the Scottish Government and councils and enterprise agencies for the response to the pandemic. The schemes that were set up in a very short space of time were quite impressive, and lots of people got lots of support just when they needed it to keep their companies and their livelihoods as well. But still many are being left behind, and I want to praise one of my own colleagues, Jamie Stone, for leading the campaign at Westminster for the excluded, those who have been left behind, those who have been forgotten, those many freelancers, self-employed, that have not got any support from any of the government schemes, whether it's in Scotland or at Westminster. And we still need to do something for them because they cannot be afforded to be left behind. And being left behind is something that we would want to have been addressed by the universal basic income. A comprehensive financial support scheme to make sure it underpinned the support mechanisms at a time of great need. And that's why I was disappointed that Benny Higgins' report, although it's a serious piece of work, it kind of lacked ambitions in many areas, but particularly around about a universal basic income. And I was disappointed that the Economy Secretary didn't really fight for it. She didn't mention it today, and I know there have been talks with the Westminster Government about it, but you just get the sense that they're a bit half-hearted. And at a time when we could have had this universal basic income, to try it out would have been a great opportunity, but sadly it's been missed. The early learning and childcare is a great disappointment for me that the government seemed to have just taken the pressure off local authorities to deliver it early. And I know it could be delivered earlier than a year, but the sense is that the pressure is off. Just at a time when people need that extra investment in early learning and childcare, because we know it's the best investment we can make for children's future, but it also helps get people back to work. And of course, on the centralisation of the enterprise agencies, getting back to the great power of the Highlands and Islands Development Board would be a great thing to do just at this time. That's when we need regional power, as cited in Benny Higgins' report. And that's why I would urge the government to get back to investing in those agencies to make sure they can make real change in their communities. Thank you.
We'll now move to the open debate, and can I have speeches of 5 minutes, please? Willie Coffey, to be followed by Dean Lockhart.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. These times we live in present the greatest challenge all of us in here will probably face in our lifetimes. The coronavirus has swept across the world like a tsunami, approaching 1 million lives lost so far and threatening to wreck economies across the world. What we do now must put in place the basis for our country to recover both from the threat of the virus to the nation's health and its threat to our economic well-being. In a sense, we have to build new starting blocks and think differently for economic recovery to protect and support the businesses and public services that we have, and to create the possibilities for recovery that our young people are depending on us to get right. We can't do it alone, of course, and we have to reach out to partners across the world to get through this. Yesterday at our Economy Committee, speaking from America, Professor David Blanchflower said that economic unrest in America is growing, and the prospects of a generation of young people cast aside to unemployment is too high a price to pay. We have to throw not only the kitchen sink at this issue, but the kitchen too, he said. He described it almost as an economic war, and we need to take all measures to win it. Here in Scotland, work is already underway. The advisory group's recommendations in June, followed by the Strategic Board's priorities for immediate action, have given us 4 clear areas to work on. Firstly, to help businesses retain what they have. Principally, the £2.3 billion worth of direct support for businesses in Scotland has been crucial in helping to save many from going out of business, as well as a range of other mechanisms to help them find additional support. Secondly, we have to support people facing redundancy as a direct result of this pandemic, and there is a package of work being undertaken to ramp up the support from PACE. We'll especially need this if the UK Government withdraws its job retention scheme as expected. We're going to need substantial resource to help those affected by that. Thirdly, the focus is on training, upskilling and helping people to make the transition into new employment. Skills Development Scotland is working on schemes to extend the apprenticeship and graduate apprenticeship programmes, and the Funding Council is working with universities to provide short reskilling courses. There are a number of digital initiatives in place too, with BT working with the Scottish Government to offer digital upskilling for many of our SMEs. Lastly, in terms of the Board's 4 key recommendations, there's work being done to help our most vulnerable people into work. £50 million will help around 20,000 young people into jobs, as well as extending Fair Start for another 2 years. and there's a £33 million investment going towards employability service this year, including No One Left Behind, helping people of all ages to overcome barriers to employment. Presiding Officer, as you know, I've been an advocate for digital and software skills to be given higher priority in our economy, and perhaps this pandemic is pushing us faster in that direction. BT's helpful briefing for the debate shows us that nearly half of all small businesses have moved online. Over a third are planning less face-to-face contact in their business, and over a third now see digital skills and tools as a key focus for their business. Digital is the fourth industrial revolution taking place, and with the right infrastructure, connectivity and skills, Scotland can be a real leader in this sector, much as we are in renewables. So it's crucial that the government's artificial intelligence strategy embraces all of this and fully exploits the potential of 5G as quickly as we can. I've mentioned before in the Chamber that the value of the digital single market in Europe alone is around €400 billion per year. And setting aside the silly decision by the UK to walk away from that, we need to position Scotland so that we can contribute and benefit from it. So, Presiding Officer, what more can governments do and what more can we do? They probably need to borrow more money to see us through this, to protect not only the present but the future economy. And Scotland needs the same borrowing powers, just like any other normal country. We could perhaps bring forward already agreed programmes of work in areas like construction and regional growth deals, money that's already committed, remember. We could also speed up our planning processes to encourage faster development. And we need more people with digital skills, and we need more digital spaces to be created to encourage new companies to emerge and innovate. But above all, I think we need to be willing to change how we do things and not be afraid to try out those new ideas. And as members, we need to work together to get through this and help ensure that the future economy in Scotland can be one that is thriving and provides opportunity for everyone. Thank you.
Dean Lockhart, please, followed by Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. My colleague Maurice Golden said in his opening remarks that there is cross-party consensus in relation to the objective set out in the Scottish Government's response to COVID. We agree that we need to achieve a green recovery, address rising unemployment, especially for younger people entering the workplace, and focus on a well-being economy. However, it has to be said that there is a fundamental flaw in the Scottish Government's response. The Scottish Government has again failed to articulate any roadmap or detailed policy guidance on how we can achieve these positive destinations. At the Economy Committee yesterday, both the Scottish Chamber of Commerce and the FSB gave evidence that the plans lack the necessary detail and finance required to make a real impact. Benny Higgins himself yesterday said that the Scottish Government needs to act with real urgency, but when you look at the policy proposals, there are no timescales set out by the Scottish Government in relation to when its plans will be implemented. Without this detail, finance and urgency, the reality is that this policy response represents a significant wasted opportunity. Yes, I'm happy. Yes, I'm very happy to.
You'll have heard in my opening remarks the rapid response we had in a number of areas. We have invested £500 million in our economic stimulus and the immediate measures to deliver the recommendations that are there. Many of the timescales, if you look at the annex, it shows you what we've already done since lockdown, what we are doing just now, and our programme from the government will set out the rest. So that detail is fully available, and we will make sure that the Conservatives are given the detail that they're asking for.
Dean Lockhart.
Well, now that we're 6 months into the COVID crisis, I look forward to getting an update from the Cabinet Secretary in relation to those timescales. What this policy review should have been about is refocusing policy to recognise and respond to the new economic trends emerging from COVID-19. First, the revolution in online trading and business. This was an opportunity to build a vibrant digital economy in Scotland. Willie Coffey referred to this, helping thousands of Scottish businesses move online. And that's why the Scottish Conservatives have called for the establishment of an e-commerce task force to help firms large and small across Scotland move their business online. This would involve digital teams from universities, colleges, the private sector, and digital graduates who may not otherwise be able to find employment at this time. The need for Scotland to rapidly increase the level of online trade and e-commerce was apparent even before the crisis. According to Nora Senior, Chair of the Strategic Board, only 9% of Scottish firms embed digital in their operations, compared to 43% in competitor countries. This was also an opportunity for the Scottish Government to respond to the new supply chains that are emerging in the aftermath of COVID. The value of the UK's onshoring market before the pandemic was estimated to be around £20 billion a year, but this market will grow rapidly in the months and years ahead. The Scottish Government needs to tell us urgently how it's going to respond to the opportunities created by the new onshore supply chains. There are 32 Scottish trade offices around the world, but there is only one for the rest of the UK, which is quite remarkable because the rest of the UK accounts for 60% of our trade. If we were to increase trade between Scotland and the rest of the UK by 5%, this would bring about an extra £2.5 billion in GDP and create thousands of new jobs. So one of the government's priorities should be to create and establish a series of Scotland and rest of UK trade offices in key regions across the UK to boost that internal market. And this is something we call on the Scottish Government to action. This was also an opportunity to explore new export markets for Scotland's excellent produce and services. The Scottish Government could do this by creating a new virtual network of global Scots to sit alongside the actual network of global Scots. And I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary is about to say that is a work in progress, and I've been working with the Scottish Chambers of Commerce to help with virtual roadshows and networks. I must continue. Now, all of the policy measures I've just suggested are within the existing powers and budgets of the Scottish Government. But none of these new economic trends have really been addressed in the Scottish Government's policy response. And the Scottish Government's response is all the more inadequate when we look at what the UK Government has achieved in the same period, saving 900,000 jobs across Scotland and delivering more than £15 billion of emergency funding to Scotland. As part of its response to COVID, the Scottish Government has asked for more borrowing powers and more money from Westminster, but we think this is merely a constitutional distraction. The Scottish Government should instead tell us urgently how it will use its existing budget, including the £500 million allocated to the Scottish National Investment Bank, in helping firms to survive and to save jobs. And I genuinely would say this to the Cabinet Secretary, when calling for more money from Westminster, the Scottish Government should reflect on the fact that it has lost £500 million in the last year alone through investment write-downs, cost overruns on 2 ferries and on various other public sector projects. That £500 million could have gone a long way to save firms and jobs across Scotland during this crisis. I support the amendment in Maurice Golden's name.
You'll notice I have allowed a wee bit of time for interventions. There's still a wee bit of time there, but please don't take advantage. You could all learn from the psychic powers that we saw earlier. And I now call Gillian Martin, followed by Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've said quite a few times in recent months that we're experiencing a triple economic assault in the northeast of Scotland: COVID and lockdown, a low oil price and looming Brexit. The first of those threats is unavoidable. COVID is not anyone's fault, and the Scottish Government has done what it can with the powers and resources it has to mitigate the effects for many businesses. The second threat is, to be frank, partially self-inflicted. We have been here a few times before. A decades-old reliance on oil and gas for the North East economy still makes us extremely vulnerable to geopolitical and market shocks. And we need to be speeding away from that reliance, justly transitioning to low-emission technologies and fuels, and ensuring sustainable jobs are the future for my area. Brexit, the third assault, is not of the making of the people of Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire either, who overwhelmingly voted against it. Members will have seen the Warwick University study last month that says that the effects of Brexit are already the equivalent of £9,000 per person in the North East. There are, thankfully, routes out of all these threats to our economy. The Brexit catastrophe has a constitutional escape hatch, which we only need to unlock, but that's for another day. The COVID situation has further exposed the flaws of the fiscal and borrowing power share between the UK and Scottish governments and has made a strong case for the Scottish Government being able to have the same powers available to the other European nations who right now are borrowing money to fund their economic recovery, countries like Germany, as John Mason mentioned. It's to the just transition element of this that I want to turn to, as I believe this is to be the most important solution to the particular economic issues that the North East faces. The North East can be the nexus of that green recovery. We already have a workforce which is ideally placed in terms of transferable skills to lead the transition from fossil fuels to low-carbon fuels and technologies. These new and emerging technologies are already being worked on in the area, in particular in our two universities, the National Decommissioning Centre in Newborough and our Oil and Gas Technology Centre, which I've long argued should be renamed to be a Future Energy Centre because of the work it does across supporting all types of energy innovation. And I've recently met with our colleagues at Opportunity North East, Scottish Renewables and the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, who are all speaking with one clear voice on what needs to happen. And their messages to elected representatives and asks of the Scottish Government is that skills funding and training avenues that can enhance the existing skills of the oil and gas workforce into renewables and low-carbon technologies must be a priority for the area. They are also very clear that investment in the skills to prepare young people to be the workforce of not just the immediate green recovery, but the sustainable Scotland of the future should be our #1 priority. Substantial investment and focus in providing the sorts of careers that will not be susceptible to global economic shocks of a fluctuating market and will lead us to a low-emission Scotland is needed. And they'll be very pleased at what the Cabinet Secretary has said today around the youth guarantee. The Cabinet Secretary has outlined substantial stimulus investment that she's already made, and there have been particular support given to the North East in the last couple of months, and that's very welcome. But we as a nation do need the borrowing tools to invest more where it's needed strategically for the long term. We are, as always, pushing stone up a hill with so many levers with regard to energy being reserved. And the UK Environment Bill is only just underway and well overdue. The UK must take immediate action on degasification of the grid and have emissions targets that at least match our own in terms of emissions if we are to succeed. But in Scotland and in the North East in particular, we have a small window of opportunity, which I would say is closing rapidly, to be world leaders and to develop and export both the emerging technologies and low-emissions fuel products to other countries. Again, I point to Germany, who see Scotland as being a potential supplier of the hydrogen that they're changing their systems to take as they transition. Reskilling and a change in tack in terms of the career paths for young people will take many forms. There's no single solution, but in conjunction with the educators, employers and the innovators of my area, we can focus the transitional training into ensuring that the North East stays the energy capital of Europe, but a sustainable one with our climate change goals at the centre. And just in the last couple of seconds before I sit down, my final point is that we should lock in the remote working flexibility of the pandemic. I've long argued that flexible and agile working means less commuting and emissions, less stress and more trust in the workforce. We cannot go back to the pre-pandemic inflexibility that has played a real part in maintaining the stubborn gender pay gap in this country. Thank you.
Sarah Boyack, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The news today that the UK economy is officially in recession is no surprise to any of us. Huge numbers of people have lost their jobs and many more are at risk. Women in particular have lost their jobs, and it's vital that as we come out of the pandemic, we build back better. And that's why Scottish Labour has been campaigning this summer for a quality jobs guarantee with a living wage and for action to get young people the skills and opportunities they need to make the most of the talents. And I think we need to see more leadership from both the Scottish and the UK governments so that the financial support and investment in our economy delivers multiple benefits with equality and fairness at the heart of all the investment that's made with our money. And the Scottish Government, I believe, needs to particularly act on the recommendations that were made by the STUC to target investment in strategic economic assets and deliver fair work conditionality in grants and contracts. I think that would benefit many people across Scotland. So, for example, it's been good that our bus industry has been given support from the government, but we could still see stronger accountability at the local level and influenced by our local authorities. And although the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery report framed its report around a wellbeing economy and proposed for action on climate change woven throughout the government's actions, I agree with Andy Whiteman, it didn't give clear leadership in its own recommendations. But we have got many other organisations coming up with really practical, sensible solutions. The Climate Emergency Response Group highlighted 8 specific areas where investment would create jobs and tackle the climate emergency at the same time. Now, I can't go through all of them in the time available, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. The Cabinet Secretary, for example, mentioned the expansion in renewables and community heat projects we need to see. It could create thousands of jobs in Scotland. But we need the manufacturing jobs so that those progressive movements can take place, and that's not currently happening. So the Scottish Government needs to use its leadership to deliver the extra manufacturing jobs that would come if we saw the community and renewable expansion that we need. Take another example, investing in retrofitting our homes across the country to eliminate fuel poverty and again lower carbon emissions, a win-win. It's estimated this could create 6,000 long-term jobs. But again, we need the certainty, the political commitment and the contracts to deliver right across our communities. I'm glad that low-carbon skills have been mentioned, but again, we need a much more coherent approach. A couple of people have mentioned retailing, and Richard Leonard mentioned the fact that Edinburgh is quiet this summer. There's a real issue about the challenge, the loss of retail and hospitality jobs that are either gone or potentially very vulnerable. So our councils need to be financially supported so they can take the lead locally to regenerate our town centres, to work with local businesses and to build back better. I believe using community wealth building principles and making sure that we support women and young people, both vulnerable to the loss of jobs in those sectors. I agree with Gillian Martin. We have seen some positives over the last few months, more flexible home working and digitisation. But many businesses are struggling to get back on track, particularly the arts sector. So retaining existing jobs must be our priority. Yesterday, I raised the issue of the viability of leisure centres across the country, and it came up at FMQs today. There are 4,500 jobs potentially vulnerable here because of the lack of viability and sustainability for a lot of our leisure companies. And I'm told that young people are the demographic most likely to be made redundant first, so we need that support now to prevent that from happening. Today is a good opportunity for us to focus on what we can agree on, and there's clear agreement across the chamber that we need a wellbeing economy. But the issue is, how is that actually delivered? What are the practical measures? And can we make sure that every pound that is spent, whether it's the Scottish or the UK government, is going to deliver multiple benefits? The climate crisis hasn't gone away, and good career-centred jobs for young people will not just appear. So we need action and leadership. Our amendment today calls on the Scottish Government to bring forward the child payment and to invest in flexible childcare. This is absolutely crucial to make sure that our recovery does not see women losing out further. They need to be able to get back into the labour market and not to be pushed out. There's a huge inequality taking place and we need to challenge it. Investment in childcare frees women to work, presents an opportunity to create good quality jobs, and also enables us to support our young people growing up in Scotland so that parents can actually get back to work once their kids are at school. What's striking today is the level of agreement there is here across the chamber for investment in low-carbon jobs and for training, and for long-term investment that delivers on good quality jobs that people can afford to live on. Not just in the chamber, there is big support for this out in our communities as well. We do need a transition, so I hope the Scottish Government commits not just to listen, but to act. There's a lot of key actions that need to be taken, and building back better means that the Scottish Government's in pole position. So I hope you listen to us, Cabinet Secretary, and the programme for government actually acts on these key principles and we see the results that our constituents desperately need. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Claudia Beamish, who will join us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to have been called to speak in this debate this afternoon, and very pleased indeed to hear from the Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop her recognition of the need for a wide-reaching, comprehensive action plan to tackle the economic crisis we are facing as a result of the global coronavirus pandemic. In terms of the generality of the response, I commend the absolute determination that is clear on the part of the Scottish Government to focus on a jobs-based recovery and to pursue an all-hands-on-deck approach with the Scottish Government agencies working alongside employers, alongside trade unions and the third sector. It is quite clear indeed that the scale of the COVID-19 economic challenge requires a recognition by all of us that we cannot proceed with a business-as-usual approach. In terms of some of the specific proposals put forward, I would wish to focus on youth employment, a subject very dear to my heart, and I would wish to commend the financial commitment increase to £60 million we've heard today, being made available by the Scottish Government as regards that key issue of youth employment. I understand that this will see some 20,000 young people supported in employment through the Jobs Guarantee Scheme and other measures. I'm aware that the work of Sandy Begbie in terms of looking at the detail of the implementation, and I know that he's working alongside employers, local authorities, third sector and youth work organisations. I know too that local developing the young workforce groups, including in Fife, have been asked to feed in their ideas and suggestions. Given that the Scottish Government has accepted all 25 recommendations of the Economic Advisory Group, it is clear that the Youth Job Guarantee must involve sustainable jobs with opportunities for training, for apprenticeships and for the real possibility of progression in the job, not just tick-box exercises. And this will be a key measurement of the success of the Job Guarantee Scheme. And I would ask the Cabinet Secretary in her closing remarks if she could confirm, or I would ask Mr Hepburn, I see, in his closing remarks, if he would confirm that my understanding of the Government's absolute commitment to that approach is very much in place. For if we do not get this right, we risk leaving behind a whole generation, and I'm sure that that is as unacceptable to the Scottish Government as it is to me. I also would wish to take this opportunity of welcoming the additional sum of £10 million to be invested in measures to recruit and retain apprentices, which we have heard about also this afternoon. This key focus on youth employment, together with the determination to work more closely with business, to maximise the economic impact of public procurement, to invest in digital capabilities, these measures will be essential to ensure business recovery and to ensure that we do indeed transition to a resilient, sustainable and well-being economy. However, Presiding Officer, as welcome as this action plan is, with more detail to be fleshed out in the weeks to come, particularly as has been mentioned in the programme for government, there are two key elephants I would suggest in the room, both of which stand very much at the door of the UK government. First, the Benny Higgins report called for an acceleration of the review of the fiscal framework, that is, the framework governing financial relationships as between the Scottish Government and the UK Government. This is vital that this happens because at the present time, of course, we see that the UK Government continues to refuse to rise to the scale of the economic challenges of COVID-19. And so whatever action we take here will obviously be hampered in its effects. Indeed, we have seen calls for the UK Government to extend the furlough scheme into 2021 ignored. We have seen calls for the UK Government to come up with a fiscal stimulus package commensurate to the need involved, to the level of for example, that of Germany, where 4% of GDP has been put forward. In the UK, we have seen, in terms of fiscal stimulus, a package of 20 billion. In Germany, we see a package of 80 billion on offer. If the UK will not act, it risks a veritable tsunami of job losses, a back to the future of the Thatcherite 80s level of unemployment. As the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency, with many communities in my constituency still bearing the scars of those years, that is entirely unacceptable. So, Presiding Officer, if the UK will not act, the necessary powers must be devolved to this Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, so that we can act. And the second elephant, of course, in the room is Brexit. Because what we see is that the UK, now in the deepest recession of any of the G7 countries, with a 20% drop in GDP, what we see is the Brexit shambles looming at our door. And this must be put on hold. For even in the best of economic times, this would represent madness. But in the worst of times, in terms of a global pandemic, It is ideologically driven self-harm on a massive scale. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, it is clear that there is no union dividend for Scotland. Rather, there is a growing union deficit, and that is increasingly being recognised is evident in yet another opinion poll published today, showing yet again a majority in favour of Scottish independence. It is indeed coming yet. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call Claudia Beamish to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Prosperity and well-being for all who live in Scotland, whatever their age, wherever they live, remote, rural or inner city, and the health of our planet must be our collective quest. What does this mean? As Richard Leonard's amendment highlights, we must bring forward within the next month a quality job guarantee scheme that provides a living wage and focuses on a green and just recovery, and then stresses, which not only invests in those requiring work, but also invests in everyone's future. There must be multi-benefits for our communities in terms of good job opportunities and for our health and well-being while tackling the climate emergency. We are showing across this chamber and far beyond that we are not afraid of learning the lessons from the ways which much has changed in the lockdown while we have faced the dreadful COVID challenges. From the STUC to the Just Green Recovery Group, to name two alongside so many, there are robust calls for new actions. I welcome the range of Scottish Government stimulus support. This is a precious chance to do things different, as the Cabinet Secretary says, whether it is to create projects to insulate our homes, urban and rural, tackling the scourge of fuel poverty and addressing climate change in Awana, and bringing new jobs, or action to join the gaps in the National Ecological Network, the Scottish Nature Network, creating a framework to bring investments in nature, delivering on climate, biodiversity and well-being, and bringing jobs, often in very rural areas, or a fairer use of road space, building safe, active travel routes, and building low-emission buses to be run by municipally owned companies, creating healthier living spaces with cleaner air and less congestion, and again, more new jobs. Much of this needs the guidance and the robust Just Transition Commission to continue to make recommendations, building on its work so far across all sectors, and I stress the word all. Its final report, though, is due in March 2021. Scottish Labour continues to call for the JTC to be long-term to underpin a fair way forward to net zero, and I hope the Scottish Government will act on this quickly to give reassurance. This must contribute to policies, many of them economic, in our updated climate change plan. For the economy to really have people and the future of the planet at its heart, there must also be targeted support for particular people-centred models, two of which I want to highlight briefly today. First, community wellbeing, the strategy being developed by North Ayrshire Council, whose leader Joe Cullinane explains. The aim is to shape a new, collaborative, inclusive, sustainable and democratic local economy. This new partnership between the public sector, the community, locally owned businesses and trade unions will ensure that we take back control of our economic landscapes across the 5 pillars of procurement, employment, land and assets, I stress, and financial power and plural ownership. We have an intentional approach to build a new economy. And secondly, I want to highlight the co-op model. I am clear as a member of the Scottish Co-op Party parliamentary group that across all sectors, from farming to housing to finance and more, member-owned where people matter should be more common and merits the active support of us all. In my own region, the New Lanark World Heritage is an iconic historic example of the cooperation that this embodies, and I welcome initial Scottish Government support. We should all help to ensure its sustainable future for the nation. Conditionality here and in all financial support must be robust, and the Scottish National Investment Bank is a good model of this, and importantly, to skills. every report has emphasised how essential it is that we get the strategic development of skills for the future right, creating a skilled workforce who must be paid well. And we must also look to alternatives to GDP, which measure prosperity for all really meaningfully. We should, of course, all work together. We might reflect on Labour values of solidarity and fairness across Scotland and the UK and globally. The Prime Minister was photographed in a hard hat again yesterday, but for all the UK government support coming out of COVID, he is often the builder of barriers. His government is failing to dismantle dismantling the Department of International Development in East Kilbride, with the consequent instability for those working there, including my own Clydesdale constituency. Enshrined in our Climate Change Act is a commitment to assess the impact of our actions on the global south. Of course, this is a recognition of the stark reality that we have a responsibility as a developed nation to recognise those who did least to create the dangers of climate change and who are now suffering the effects most. This goes beyond climate change action and the importance of the Climate Justice Fund. As we face the challenges coming out of COVID here at home in Scotland, we must never forget to take our international responsibilities with the utmost seriousness in relation to our fair economic decisions as we support everyone here in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call John Mason to be followed by Alexander Burnett.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I thank you for the opportunity to take part in today's debate. I do welcome the Government's response to the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, and I'd like to touch today on some of the points raised in this response. In the section on public finances and economic recovery, the point is made that the UK public sector net debt rose to £1.98 trillion, or 99% of GDP in June. The OBR forecasts that the UK fiscal deficit will reach 15 to 23% of GDP in 2021, the highest peacetime level in 300 years. These are serious figures, and the OBR has warned that in the longer term, the UK will need to return public finances to a more sustainable path. I would very much agree with that. However, I would say that the UK has acted reasonably well during the actual pandemic when it comes to areas like the furlough scheme and business support. But it seems that we are failing in comparison to countries like Germany by not carrying out enough of a fiscal stimulus, which for us would have been an equivalent of £80 billion. To move on then to some of the more specific recommendations and responses, I'm not going to mention all 25 recommendations, and I must congratulate the Government on producing 26 responses. The first recommendation is around the review of the fiscal framework, and I very much agree that immediate improvements could be made, including temporary borrowing flexibilities, as other countries have done for their devolved governments. I also very much welcome the commitment for Parliament to be involved in the full review, not just the two governments. Recommendations 2 and 17 both mention the Scottish National Investment Bank. Infrastructure investment has to be one of the ways out of this COVID upheaval, and I welcome the commitment to publish the Infrastructure Investment Plan next month. Housing is mentioned in this regard, which is absolutely right. By focusing on infrastructure, we can spend money and create jobs, while at the same time building housing and other assets which will last long into the future. Recommendation 4 refers to ownership stakes. And I think this is quite an intriguing area, as I think public stakes in private businesses have been the exception rather than the rule in recent years. However, it seems to be quite normal in other countries, and I see no reason why it should not become more normal here too. Perhaps actually that would be one of the ways of building a better relationship between industry and government if there is public ownership within the industries. By any stretch of the imagination, many businesses have had a very generous deal in recent months from both the UK and Scottish governments. Businesses which used to complain bitterly about government interference and taxes suddenly were only too keen to accept government interference by way of furlough schemes and grants. So hopefully going forward, businesses will have a better understanding of why both local and national government need to raise taxes, introduce proper living wages and take other equality measures. Recommendation 9 talks about conditionality in business support, which links into the previous one I mentioned. I think there has been a feeling in the past that both Scottish Enterprise and HIE could be too keen to get investment in at almost any cost. So issues like a good staff gender mix and limited disparity in pay have not always had the focus they deserved. I do think there have been improvements in this regard, but there is further to go, and this is a good time to restate our commitment to these principles. Recommendations 9 and 13 both refer to some kind of tax cuts. There are rates relief mentioned, a targeted reduction in business rates, and a reduction in VAT. And I accept that these certainly can have their places, especially if they're temporary and targeted. However, we have to remember that a tax cut in one place means a cut to public services somewhere else. Given all that our NHS and care sector have been through lately, I would not want to see their budgets reduced in order to fund business tax cuts. Recommendation 15 is about adult social care, which I think Richard Leonard mentioned. This is a huge issue and has been brought to the fore by the pandemic. I suspect we'll be returning to it in more depth in the future. My own mother is in a care home, and I have to say, somewhat to my surprise, they have not had the virus so far, and she is still happily with us. I hope to see her on Sunday for the first time since March. But care home staff are generally not well paid, and whether these homes are in the public or the private or the third sector, we need to look at better pay. Better pay means higher costs or fees, and higher costs and fees means higher taxes. I do not see how we can avoid that. 22 mentions apprentices, and I think we have an increasing variety of apprenticeships, and I firmly believe that that can be the best route for many of our young and some of our older people. This last week, we have been very focused on academic results in our schools, but I think we should re-emphasise that bright futures are available even without a range of hires at A grade. And finally, 26, equalities and human rights. I very much welcome the inclusion of this specific commitment. We have to deal with some of the huge inequalities in our society. There is no point growing the economy if all the rewards go to the rich few. Whether we grow the economy or not, we have to see a fairer sharing out of our income and wealth as we start this new stage in our journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I call Alexander Burnett to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Mr. Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I note members to my register of interest. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has been something that no living person has ever experienced before, but sadly the experience of this debate is all too familiar. So firstly, the Cabinet Secretary's promise to respond to the advisory group's report by the end of July was broken, and then it was slipped out under the cover of John Swinney's education disaster and the lockdown imposed on Aberdeen, caused principally by the failure of the Scottish Government's world-beating tracing programme. So the irony of Fiona Hislop highlighting in bold on paragraph 3 the investment in this programme as some sort of Scottish Government achievement will not be lost on those of us living in the North East. Now, many of my constituents across Aberdeenshire West have been, like many others across Scotland, have been working from home for over 5 months. And one oft-repeated issue is the need for better broadband across Scotland, particularly in rural areas. And the R100 programme was promised to be delivered by 2021. Yet we now face another delay, with the North East contract still not awarded and the programme not due to be completed until 2023. And it's simply not good enough for the SNP to blame it on the pandemic, as these targets have been in place for many years. Now, it may be the week when SNP ministers should resign, but it was Fergus Ewing himself who said he would do so if the R100 was not delivered by 2021. But this is something the government identifies itself. On page 18 of its response, they note that for every public pound invested in broadband in Scotland, it delivers nearly £12 to the Scottish economy. And the briefing from BT calls that efforts to ensure the population is equipped with the necessary skills for the future that must be an immediate priority. So why in this response are we not seeing an acceleration in such investment? And the FSB said that action to address both patchy broadband infrastructure and the dearth of digital skills have been on the agenda for many years. And what we need to see is some detail about how policymakers will actually achieve these outcomes. Instead, we get another digital planning strategy, this one to be published in November, to add to the ever-growing list of plans, consultations and reviews, but of a substitute for action, delivery and outcomes under this talking shop of a government. But on a related topic, I was also surprised to see a complete absence of home working or home office support in the Cabinet Secretary's response. Many constituents across Scotland will be disappointed to be ignored whilst the government continues to ask them to work from home and it becomes the new normal. Now, working from home is not a novel idea. It is one that has been building up over many years, and developers have previously designed areas for home working into new houses. However, the effectiveness of these home working spaces has never been tested until now. So I'd ask the Scottish Government to look into this and bring forward recommendations for improvements. But back to the Government's response. Despite managing to list every existing policy and pound spent by the Scottish Government, it only found space for a single word of welcome and no mention at all in detail of the near 1 million Scottish jobs saved and the £15 billion spent by the UK Government. Similarly, the complete absence of recognition or plans to expand our contribution to the UK single market should be worrying for everyone. If the SNP have shown they don't understand business, this 70-page response is it. Douglas Fraser at the BBC described it as turgid, combining defensive past commitments with often vague future plans. Some recommendations are accepted, but on terms that risk them becoming bogged down in a task force, further reviews, or a scoping exercise. Now, this pandemic has widened the gap between rural and urban areas and brought real frustration to many constituents and businesses alike. But these problems have existed for many years, and it's disappointing to see this SNP government continue to miss opportunities to invest heavily in our rural communities. And I can only express frustration that we are here once again talking about issues that were here well before coronavirus. The CBI said a real urgency is needed to spur a recovery that turns around Scotland's economic fortunes. Focusing on immediate priorities will provide some reassurance for business. Sadly, we know all too well what the SNP's priority will be in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Stuart Stevenson, who is contributing remotely and who will be the last open debate speaker. Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And let me just address a couple of points that have come from the Tory benches before coming to the meat of what I want to say. On broadband, Scotland is the part of the UK which has seen the biggest, by far, uplift in delivery of superfast broadband. The UK government's USO provides a third of the speed that the Scottish Government is working towards. And if I may say so, Dean Lockhart showed exceptional bravery in his contribution to the debate. He suggested we lost 500 million. Well, we'll have that debate another time. But I've just checked, and so far the HS2 project controlled by the UK government is £30 billion over budget. That is 5 times bigger than 500 million per capita in Scotland. If it was in Scotland, 2.5 billion. But anyway, to the substance of the issue before us today, Presiding Officer, I think we can all agree that what the pandemic has brought us is very real fear in many of our population about the situation in which they find themselves through no fault of their own and no fault of any government. It's important that we give them hope for the future. And I think the work that the Scottish Government has been doing is precisely where we can look to for that hope. The big projects of the last 50 or 60 years have been based on hope, have been set out by ambition of leaders. And I think that's what we see before us today. John F. Kennedy taking his nation to the moon would be an example. But many of the things that we can be using today, of course, are not particularly new. I started using teleconferencing with Australia, a joint project, nearly 30 years ago. I also think it's important. Willie Coffey talked about the importance of software. Software is a vital thing, but it is also something that isn't as transient as we often think it is. I know for a fact the piece of software that I wrote 45 years ago is in use today and is maintained by my successors. I very much welcomed the fact that in her opening remarks, the Cabinet Secretary made reference to hydrogen, because in the northeast of Scotland in particular, with the hydrogen buses in Aberdeen, We've already taken some early steps to show the viability of hydrogen as a fuel for heavy transport of one sort or another, heavy goods vehicles, buses and so on and so forth. The bus support operators grant doesn't specifically focus on helping hydrogen as a way of powering buses, and I think we might care to revisit that. But in the North East, we have huge amounts of renewable energy, a lot of it onshore wind turbines, and there's space for some more. Offshore wind turbines, the High Wind project being one example, and of course, the Murray East project, where the cables are running across my constituency and into my colleague Gillian Martin's constituency, is the raw material for producing hydrogen that we can use. Just to make a wee comment about the renewable transport fuels obligation, there isn't access for hydrogen vehicles to that particular subsidy. So I think again we might look at that in addition. Now, is there an economic opportunity that particularly comes from hydrogen? Well, yes, there is, because it's in an early stage of development. We have the opportunity, the engineering skills in the North East, from working offshore to produce fuel from the North Sea, initially oil and gas, now wind turbines. That is part of it. And in my constituency, we have the Acorn project at St Fergus, taking gas from the North Sea, using the energy in a zero carbon footprint way to produce hydrogen, which can then be fed into the gas grid. And 20% of what we put in the gas grid can be hydrogen with the existing equipment that is using that hydrogen at the other end. So there's more we can do. I hope that we do that. I hope that the significant amount of money that's being put into retraining people is able to pick up the opportunity to train some more people for the skills that we need in exploiting hydrogen. Just as we've had success in the past from oil and gas, we can build our future on hydrogen. It's a huge opportunity for Scotland, but in particular for the area that I represent. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. We now move to closing speeches, and I call Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. While we've been debating this afternoon, the sad news has come through about 3 deaths following the Stonehaven derailment, and I'm sure everybody in the chamber and their thoughts will be with the families and friends of those affected, including those who are injured. I want to commend the writings of an artist from Auchtermuchty called Jim Sutherland. He's a musician and he's a composer. And he quite rightly highlights the tremendous economic potential of individual artists, freelancers, self-employed people who are the rock bed of the cultural sector in Scotland. He highlights the fact that the trickle-down approach of funding support for them is just not good enough. And I think it's worth considering how we go forward to support individuals as well as companies in the coming months, because there will be periods where we have extra support is required and the current schemes are simply not adequate.
Certainly. Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
With my cultural responsibilities, can I reassure the member that only this week I've been discussing with my officials and Creative Scotland's funding mechanisms by which we can support individual freelancers, because individual freelancers, as he said, are the bedrock of our arts, culture and events sectors.
Well, Jim Sutherland will be absolutely delighted if that comes to be the case. And I'll report that straight back to him in Auchtermuchty. I'm sure he will be very pleased. But it does speak to a wider issue here. And the wider issue here is about the extension of the furlough scheme, how it's extended, and how we make sure that the transition to new types of jobs is supported in a way that's efficient and effective. Because, of course, we should be extending the furlough scheme. That's an essential part as the lockdown continues in different parts of the country at different phases, but also we're going to have small regional, but sometimes larger regional outbreaks. So, of course, we need to extend the furlough scheme as well as the other support mechanisms. But we also need to make sure that we allow businesses the space to be able to transition to new types and new markets. And sometimes just protecting what we have is not good enough. So we need to have a smarter and bespoke targeted furlough scheme to make sure that businesses get the support when they need it, but they're also supported to transition to new types of markets and work when that's appropriate as well. So just a blunderbuss furlough scheme is just not going to be good enough. We need to have a smarter system so that it's flexible. But that also speaks to what Richard Leonard was talking about earlier, about the Aberdeen lockdown. There are many businesses in Aberdeen that will be struggling just now, and they need extra support. And of course, the furlough scheme is there for those who can apply for it, but it's not available to everyone. So we need to make sure that there is a flexibility again at a local level to support those businesses. Then, of course, there's the environmental side. And Stuart Stevenson has just been talking eloquently about hydrogen and the potential for that. And I agree with him. We should not therefore be supporting individual technologies, but try to be technology blind and supporting as many of those that have got opportunities as possible. That's why I'm in favour of the carbon capture scheme, getting the support that's necessary, but also offshore wind. And I just hope one day that we'll be able to report in this chamber, again as Richard Leonard was talking about, that we can transfer that massive investment in offshore into jobs onshore. Because so far we've failed to do it. And I hear grumblings here about that it's some other government somewhere else that's responsible for this. The promises were made here, and we need to work so much harder to bring industry together with government to make sure we make those changes rather than grumbling about somebody else not doing their job. Let's make this happen because it's really important. I certainly will take an intervention, yes.
Paul Wheelhouse.
Grateful to Willie Rennie for taking intervention. I think it's simply wrong of him to describe it as grumbling. It is a fact. The UK Government controls energy policy and is responsible for the contract for difference mechanism, which has driven prices down and driven prices down through the supply chain, which has made it more difficult for Scottish contractors to win the work.
Well, that's not what we were promised when the support was provided to BIFAB. The BIFAB support was there and the promise was made to save the jobs, to make sure we can exploit the potential. And of course there's going to be hurdles in the way. But for goodness sake, the promises were made, so let's make them happen. Where are the discussions with the UK Government to transition that, to make that happen? But I want to talk about the constructive engagement that I've had with the Scottish Government as well, because we have had. I'm sure the Minister will recognise that there has been good discussions between all the opposition spokespeople and the Minister about the way ahead. And Sandy Begbie, in particular, has been in touch about the Young People's Job Scheme. And I wish him well on navigating the myriad of different employment and support schemes that are around, because it's not easy. There's going to be real challenges to make sure that we can make them all tie up together. Let's not compete against one another with these various schemes. Let's make them work together seamlessly to give that support. And let's make sure that they're given proper living wage support. And if companies need the support to make that happen, let's find a way to do that. Because it's important that these are good quality jobs to make sure that we make that progress. John Mason talked about capital investment, in particular about housing. I agree with him. I agreed with Gillian Martin in terms of the big challenges, in terms of oil and gas, Brexit and COVID. We shouldn't be adding to that with other challenges, but these are certainly massive challenges that we need to get a grip on. Because at the end of the day with this, we need to get on top of this virus. Because if we can get on top of the virus, we can get consumer confidence coming back, we can get businesses to have the confidence, and we can grow the economy in a sustainable and fair way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call Andy Whiteman.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Like Willie Rennie, the thoughts of myself and my parliamentary colleagues are also with those who've lost loved ones in the train derailment, those who are injured, and the no doubt traumatic work of the British Transport Police and emergency services. Presiding Officer, there does remain still at the end of this afternoon a lot we're not talking about. And that's why we need to continue to debate these important topics, because the journey, the direction of travel we set out on now, not just the Scottish Government, the UK Government as well, is going to determine the fortunes and the life chances of so many people across Scotland. And it's doing so at a time when, for example, real wages still remain below 2008 levels. We're doing it at the time when inequalities that were there before the crisis have been exacerbated, where the pain felt over the past 6 months has been disproportionately experienced by those on lower incomes who remain in risky work, women, the young and the BME community. It's fallen disproportionately on those who earn an income by their labour, as opposed to those who are in receipt of unearned income and economic rent from the ownership of capital, whether that be shares, gilts, land, property, from which rent must, by law, continue to be derived upon the pain of eviction and court orders. And so those earning their incomes from labour have done worse than those who collect economic rent. And that's an exacerbation in inequalities that was already there before. For example, between 2004 and 18, companies' returns to shareholders grew by 56%. At that same time, net incomes have fallen by 3%, and median wages risen by only 8.8. Indeed, if wages had matched the shareholder returns, the average worker today would be worth around 10,000, would be better off by around 10,000 per year. Now, yesterday, it was already mentioned, I think, by Willie Coffey in an evidence session of the Economy Committee. We were joined by Professor David Blanchflower in a discussion of the impact on COVID on young people. And all the evidence, he said, and he's a world-renowned economist, and he's got access to all the global evidence, all the evidence, he said, pointed to a very deep scarring on the life prospects of the young across the planet. And as he wrote in The Guardian in May, past research has shown that those who enter the labour market during a downturn carry the cost of doing so into middle age. Those come in the form of lower wages and a higher risk of unemployment. And what the young in particular need is a new deal on jobs, on housing, on education and well-being. And Professor Blanchflower argued we need to throw not just the kitchen sink at this, but the whole kitchen. He also made a profoundly important point that national plans, whether those be Scottish or UK, come with inherent weaknesses in that they can miss important local and regional circumstances. And his view was very, very clear that delivery of recovery schemes should be primarily the responsibility of local government and not central government. Now, a jobs guarantee is fine, but who knows best how to deliver jobs guarantees? They are the young themselves, and they should be involved in that. The schemes need to be flexible. They need to be locally delivered. Now, I understand that that's the detail. Yes.
Fiona Hislop.
If I can reassure you, the direction that Sandy Begbie is taking this is absolutely in that way. If you hadn't had the opportunity of the Green Party to speak with him, I would encourage you to do so. And only yesterday, I spoke with Bernardo's and Young Scots, along with Sandy Begbie, about the shape and what their expectations are, because young people should be at the heart of developing this scheme as well.
Andy Whiteman. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that. It's a very useful point, and I'll be monitoring matters closely going forward on that front. But missing, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, in all of this debate has been anything about the ownership and governance of the economy, about finance, new mutual, crowdsourced models, co-ops, local economies, supply chains, fiscal policy, nothing on basic income, shorter working weeks, land reform. It goes on and on. Structural reforms to the economy that would make it more equal, more sustainable and more resilient. Now, responding to several contributions in the debate, Gillian Martin, as she usually does, stood up for the North East, and I hope her faith in low-carbon transitions is realised. I very much agree with her comments on flexible working. I think the only member who raised that in a substantive way. Another issue not addressed by the advisory group report, along with wider discussions on basic income or shorter working weeks. Annabel Ewing raised the question of job guarantee scheme, and I've already mentioned how important it is that that be flexible, and as I say, I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's indications on that front. John Mason was right to highlight the future of the fiscal framework, which I don't think is fit for purpose, but is as important as the fiscal framework between London and Edinburgh is the neglected matter of a fiscal framework for local government. Willie Rennie made the important point about over-promising, particularly on the economy and renewables in particular. Beyond that, I'm not sure that the debate took us much further forward. From the government's response, there's plenty of work for civil servants in the plans, strategies, initiatives, reviews and programmes mentioned, but little on the big transformational ideas that so many people are calling for. Because the economy is not solely about the interests of business. It's about workers, it's about infrastructure, it's about care, it's about housing, it's about the environment. And so The kind of priorities the government needs to adopt are priorities and initiatives that are being discussed widely in think tanks, in academia, in business, in industry, in trade unions around the UK and across the world. And ultimately, in a pandemic in particular, the safety of our citizens, the financial security must be the priority, not a returning to business as usual, which puts economic growth before both of those things. There's plenty the government can do on all of this, and there is much indeed in its response, which I think will be useful. Ministers should look again at our Scottish Green New Deal. I think Labour's consistent argument for an industrial strategy has a lot of merit. And particularly it needs, as I said in response to comments by Willie Rennie, to stop over-promising and be realistic about what can be achieved, but also what needs to be achieved in the medium and long term if we're going to have the economic revolution that the Cabinet Secretary called for a couple of months ago. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call on Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I also want to put on record and send our condolences to those who have lost loved ones at the derailment today at Stonehaven. Our thoughts are with them and indeed the emergency services who are working there. Presiding Officer, COVID-19 has damaged our health and our economy, and we've heard that around the chamber today in this debate. But if we stand back wringing our hands, that simply makes matters worse. The Scottish Government need to act now. And while there's nothing to disagree with in their motion, it lacks a sense of urgency, and our amendment seeks to establish that sense of urgency into the debate. We should be looking at the implementation of these policies now rather than waiting for announcements at the programme for government. And I hope they are ready to be put in place at that time, because we can't delay any further. We have to recognise that young people and women are facing the greatest impact, and both our governments need to act, and act soon. But we're in the Scottish Parliament and we need to focus on the levers we have here. We in the Scottish Labour Party have continually called for a quality jobs guarantee scheme, and that appears to have unanimous support. And indeed, I welcome the Scottish Government having adopted that policy, but we need to see it in action because we can't afford a delay. The effects of unemployment are devastating. It forces families into poverty, and its health impact is greater than that of smoking. The impact on society is that it scars communities for generation. We need to make sure that the Quality Jobs Guarantee Scheme pays a living wage, not a poverty wage. And others, including Claudia Beamish, talked about just transition and green jobs. And I think that's a really important part of a job guarantee scheme. When I was in one of my early jobs, I worked on schemes that provided opportunities for unemployed. And I remember the community project provided great environmental work, but also at a living wage, and we need to look at how we can emulate that. Sarah Boya, Claudia Beamish talked about retrofit, and I think we need to do that and look at other things. Willie Rennie echoed Richard Leonard talking about how we capture the renewable jobs. We must invest in renewables, but we must also capture those jobs for our communities. And I hear today from Unite that CS Wind in Machrihanish is no longer bidding for work in the renewable sector. If that's the case, the government need to act. They need to claw back the public support that was given to that company, and they must stop them having a dead hand over that community. And I will take an intervention.
Paul
I'm grateful to the member taking intervention. Not sure if it's my laptop there. Apologies. CS Wind, the member may be aware, Highlands Islands Enterprise are actually in the process of taking court action to retain funding from CS Wind, so it's sub judice potentially.
Rhoda Grant.
I welcome that intervention, and hopefully that yard can be put to work quickly. We need to also concentrate on young people and women, and people talked in the debate about skills and learning, but our colleges and universities are struggling and they need support to train our workforce for the future. Procurement was another issue that came up and is close to my heart. We need to use fair work practices in procurement. We need to insist on local content. We need to look at small and micro businesses and co-ops to make sure they're included in that. We need, Claudia Beamish talked about the Community Wealth Scheme in North Ayrshire, a fantastic example that we should be rolling out throughout our communities. We need to support women as well. We need to move to the promised free childcare. And I understand why some of that investment money in that scheme was held back and invested in key worker childcare. But in that short space of time, that was maybe the right thing to do. It was a quick fix. However, deferring the start of the scheme is actually going to cause more damage to women who are being forced out of work, 50% more than men out of work. We need to make sure that there is childcare there to allow them to go back to work and give them the... Otherwise, we roll back the gender equality debate for a generation. In fact, more than a generation. We would be worse off than our mothers if we let that happen. Presiding officer, we need to act quickly before it's too late, because if we leave it too late, it'll be much harder to put right. We need to build back better. We need to create an equal and caring society. And I appeal to the Scottish Government to use every lever they have to rebuild our economy, and to do that without delay.
Thank you very much. I now call Donald Cameron. Donald Cameron, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, can I express our sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones in the railway incident at Stonehaven, and acknowledge too the efforts of the emergency services in this tragic event. The COVID-19 crisis has so far proven to be one of, if not the most significant challenge to our economy in the peacetime era. I've been heartened by the efforts of the UK Government in the rapid work that they conducted to ensure hundreds of thousands of Scottish jobs were protected and thousands of businesses supported. And indeed, I too, and reiterate this, I welcome the efforts of the Scottish Government in that endeavour as well. Just last week, figures published by the British Business Bank show that it has provided UK government-backed loans and support worth more than £2.3 billion to more than 65,000 firms in Scotland since the outbreak. And in the Highlands and Islands region that I represent, businesses received a total of £238 million worth of loans. And that has undoubtedly kept many businesses afloat when they would otherwise have been left to sink, and protected thousands of local jobs. And in addition to this, almost 900,000 jobs in Scotland have been secured through either the furlough scheme or the self-employed support scheme. And again, in the Highlands and Islands, approximately 68,000 jobs have been protected. And many businesses in the hospitality, retail and tourism sectors will be benefiting from additional footfall generated by schemes from the Treasury. These are all positive developments for the here and now, but we must also recognise that the road to recovery will not be an easy one. Today we learned that the UK economy is officially in the largest recession on record. Not unexpected, given everything that's happened, but official confirmation of this is undoubtedly a salutary moment. And just yesterday, the Fraser-Allender Institute gave its quarterly update on the latest labour market data, and its commentary was stark. Scottish unemployment rose by 11,000 to a rate of 4.5%. That's an increase of 0.4% on 3 months ago. The numbers of hours worked hit a record low, with the largest quarterly decrease in actual weekly hours since records began in 1971. Employment among the over 65s decreased at a record quarterly rate after growing rapidly since the global financial crisis. And the number of people in self-employment has fallen at a record quarterly rate as well. These are worrying, deeply worrying trends, and could likely be worse at the next quarter, given we do not take into account changes in July and August. And that's been recognised by both the Scottish Government and the UK Government. The Secretary of State for Scotland yesterday acknowledged this and said that the UK Government would guarantee an additional £6.5 billion this year to spend on public services and support businesses in Scotland. Given all of this, it is clearly imperative that we not only plan ahead for our economic recovery, but that those plans are detailed and can be subjected to regular scrutiny. Yes, indeed.
Fiona Hislop.
He talked in his opening remarks about the amount of loans that have been given to companies and welcome. And obviously, the UK government has the power and the powers to be able to do that in terms of lending. But the very practical issue is next year when firms start repaying that, and how collectively we can identify how we can ensure there's growth and confidence for investment at a time when many, many companies are carrying debt. That's something that I've already discussed with the UK government, but I think that's an area that we need to get into. Different solutions may come to that, but it's something we really have to focus on, because it's not just in October when the furlough ends, it's also going to be next year with tax deferrals, etc., that we have to address some very serious issues to get growth back on the agenda when people are dealing and companies are dealing with extended debt.
Donald Campbell.
Well, I don't deny any of that, and I would also add to that I think that debate requires action from both the Scottish Government and the UK Government, but it also involves a dialogue with the banks and the various other lenders who have been lending money to firms and businesses and individuals during this time. And I think there is, and I entirely agree with her, there is a very important debate to be had, and we should be having that debate actually sooner rather than later. Now, with those of us on these benches have cautiously welcomed the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery report and the work carried out by Benny Higgins and his team, we do remain concerned at the lack of detail and that certain measures proposed in the plan do not go far enough. I've noted before the various environmental measures in the plan, such as the Green Investment Plan, which are welcome. But many of these measures are long-term ambitions, such as the £2 billion fund, which is earmarked for the next Parliament, or the Green Investment Portfolio, which has a 3-year timetable, or the proposed digital planning strategy, which the SNP government aims to publish in November and has a 5-year timetable for delivery. Now, whilst many of these proposals are welcome, they are not the short-term boosts that the economy needs during this crisis. And as we've seen, the creation of yet further strategies and task force, as Alex Burnett said, should not let us negate the fact that we need to take concrete, pragmatic action. If I give one example, the Higgins report called for the SNP to work with local authorities to cut red tape and to accelerate infrastructure projects. But instead, we've heard that the government will only carry out a comprehensive review of national planning policies. And what I would say, and reiterate what Maurice Golden so powerfully said, we need real action. Plans for the near future are needed. And having spoken to constituents who work across various sectors of the economy, I'm all too aware of the need for this. Just touching briefly in my final minute, Deputy Presiding Officer, on remarks that have been made by others. I was very struck how the economic effects of this crisis are so varied and are impacting on so many areas. It's a cliche, but COVID has affected everyone. And this debate, I think, showed, it illustrated in Scotland how true this is, whether it was Andy Whiteman talking about young people or the need for the local fiscal framework to be reviewed, Gillian Martin talking about oil and gas, Rhoda Grant talking about jobs, the Job Guarantee Scheme, and also Willie Rennie. I was very struck by his comments about not forgetting individuals in this debate. So often we talk about businesses and firms and companies and enterprises, but how important it is to remember individual people if they are in business on their own. Deputy Presiding Officer, it's clear we need a detailed policy memorandum which gives businesses and stakeholders the confidence going forward that support will be in place to aid the economy. We argue that it is time for the Scottish Government to take action swiftly and urgently, and I urge members to support our amendment.
Thank you very much. I call on Jamie Hepburn to wind up the debate. Minister, you have 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and as others have done, please allow me to lay out my condolences and my thoughts and sympathies to those who have been affected by the tragedy at Stonehaven, and of course the Scottish Government stands ready to support them in any way we can. Today's debate has been, I think, a very productive and constructive one. There are, of course, some differences of opinion, as is ever the case, but I think what we've seen today is a real commonality of purpose, a clear sense that we have to come together to support people come through the difficult economic circumstances that Richard Leonard was quite right to say are upon us now, and which we know will be with us for the time ahead. The recent months have, of course, been, above all, a public health crisis. The Scottish Government's primary approach has been to respond to it as such. That remains the case. The imperative is there to continue to suppress transmission of COVID-19 and to save lives. But throughout, we've also been alert to the economic impact as well. We have reacted to support small businesses, to support the newly self-employed. We've had focused support for tourism and hospitality and the culture sector, some £2.3 billion of support to business. And if Dean Lockhart wants a timescale for delivery of that, that has happened, that has been done, that is in place already, just as is the £500 million of economic stimulus the Cabinet Secretary referred to earlier. Throughout, we've also engaged regularly with business organisations and trade unions. We've worked with industry and unions to put in place a raft of guidelines to help various sectors return to activity when it's been safe to do so. We've established the Tourism Recovery Task Force and the Aerospace Response Group. And of course, we have a clear focus on moving forward to support people through the period of economic recovery ahead. That is, of course, the theme of today's debate. I would observe that we have strong foundations to move forward from, Presiding Officer. We have much of the infrastructure in place. Skills Development Scotland support first-class careers advice and our PACE service and have a variety of provision, not least apprenticeships. They remain an important part of providing opportunities for people in the times ahead. John Mason was quite right to highlight the opportunity they provide. And the Cabinet Secretary has already reminded us of the Adopt an Apprentice scheme, which we have enhanced with additional funding. We have a tertiary education sector delivering outstanding educational opportunities geared towards our economic and societal need. The Flexible Work Development Fund is, of course, vested with the college sector, driving closer working between colleges and employers in their respective areas. And we've doubled the value of that fund this academic year. We have our employability programmes established and in place. Our Fair Start Scotland programme has supported many thousands of people since its inception, making a difference to those who it supports, and we have extended it for a further 2 years under the terms of the contracts in place. And in terms of Willie Rennie's point, I actually agree with the point he makes around the employability system sometimes being a complex one. We will continue to take forward our No One Left Behind agenda to make sure it is a more coherent and straightforward system to traverse. We have, of course, asked both the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery and the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board subgroup to take forward some work for us in recent weeks. I want to thank those who took part in that activity. The scale of the challenge ahead of us is set out clearly in both of those reports, but the recommendations for urgent action are clear and none have been discounted. Even before publishing our responses to the reports, we have acted on key recommendations. This includes our £100 million investment in employment and skills support, including the £60 million funding to support young people that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned. We'll also maximise our PACE offer for those facing redundancy, which, as Willie Coffey rightly said, is of critical importance at this time. And we'll bring forward plans for a transition training fund to help those in sectors at risk. And I want to say a little about each of those in turn. To show our commitment to supporting young people through this time, we are committing that £60 million from our £100 million employability and skills package to support Scotland's Youth Guarantee. We're committed to supporting young people through difficult times, and indeed we have and will be able to build on our strong track record through our Developing the Young Workforce programme. I think the appointment of Sandy Begbie was a very good one. Sandy has personal, professional commitment to the agenda of ensuring that young people especially young people who might not have otherwise had the opportunity, are able to get ahead in the labour market. And I know he will be very keen to engage with the other parties to hear what they think the type of work needs to be taken forward through the Scottish Youth Guarantee might look like. Willie Rennie has mentioned he's spoken with them, and he'll be very happy to speak with other parties as well. And in that regard, we will be supporting the motion tabled by Richard Leonard, recognising the importance of ensuring that Scotland's young people do not bear the brunt of the economic challenges created by COVID-19. That is something that we recognise through the creation of the Youth Guarantee, and indeed going further than the Job Guarantee put forward in the Labour Amendment, but considering the full range of opportunities we need to support all young people. I can confirm to Annabel Ewing her ambitions are as ours. We will make sure we build on the DYW agenda. It will be front and centre, and will include all opportunities through education, training, apprenticeships and employment. And to be very clear, it will have the Fair Work and Living Wage agenda at its core. In terms of the Transition Training Fund, the pandemic has resulted in changes to the labour market that mean many will need to move sectors to stay in work. We will, of course, learn from our experience of the Transition Training Fund that we had in place for the oil and gas sector in the past, and we will now create a new Transition Training Fund that will work on a cross-sector basis. And in relation to the points that were made, I think very powerfully by a number of members, that has to be, as indeed all our investment has to be, very much geared towards the challenge of ensuring that people come through with a skill set that will allow them to get ahead in the labour market with the needs of our economy and society going forward. And in PACE, there is already work underway. I'm leading a short-life working group of the partner organisations to look rapidly at how we can maximise the service to ensure it meets the rising levels of demand. On the amendment that is in the name of Maurice Golden, we will be supporting that. And I think that's primarily on the basis that we do want to respond to the call to work constructively with the UK Government, because that is precisely what we have sought to do. Throughout this entire process, we have engaged and maintained regular contact with UK Government counterparts on measures to try and mitigate the crisis. And I'm also keen for the UK Government to continue the success of the support measures that have been mentioned in the amendment in the name of Maurice Golden. I'm keen that they consider our call to look at extending the job retention scheme, for example, because we know there is significant concern about the cliff edge of ending of furlough. And I'm also keen that the UK Government works constructively with us. For example, I hope they will respond positively to my invitation for BEIS to be involved in the Aerospace Response Group. I chair. The invitation has been made but not thus far been accepted. It remains open, and I hope it will be. Presiding Officer, let me conclude by saying, in response to Andy Whiteman, he was unclear what we mean by a well-being economy. And I want to put it in simple terms what we mean, and those are ones I think he and others will agree with, those laid out by the First Minister last year when she addressed the Wellbeing Economy Government's policy labs here in Scotland. It's an economy which recognises that GDP can't be the only measure of economic success. It's one which recognises that quality of life for our people is paramount. It's one that places equal importance on addressing inequality as it does on competitiveness. And it's one that puts itself to the test as to whether it is creating a fairer, healthier and happier nation. In responding to the challenges ahead of us, President Officer, that's the destination we seek. I hope it's one that we collectively seek. And our response to economic recovery and back of both of the reports that we've debated today will be very much geared towards getting us there. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes the debate on an implementation plan for economic recovery, and we will move on in a moment to the next item of business.
Thank you, colleagues. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 22408 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a business programme. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Now, no member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 22408 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. We're going to turn now to decision time, and I should perhaps say to members, both here in the chamber and those joining us remotely, that if there is a division this evening, that will offer us the first opportunity to use the new remote voting system. If that is the case, I will suspend proceedings for a 15-minute technical break to make sure the new voting system is ready. I should also point out the obverse, that if there are no divisions, that is, that if everybody agrees to the motion and all the amendments, there will be no use of the new voting app. The first question this evening is that Amendment 22396.1 in the name of Maurice Golden, which seeks to amend motion 22396 in the name of Fiona Hislop on an implementation plan for economic recovery be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. Members, I'm going to suspend proceedings for a 15-minute technical break to allow members both here and remotely, remember there's a lot of members joining us remotely, to make sure that we're ready to use the voting app. Meeting is suspended.